Since I was young, the concept of what happens after we die has always haunted and fascinated me. I would stare at the night sky, overwhelmed by the vastness of the universe, and wonder if we simply vanish into nothingness when our time ends, or if something greater awaits. It's not just a question of curiosity, it's a deeply emotional quest for meaning. I think most people, at some point, grapple with the same haunting thought: is this all there is? This obsession isn't new. Across cultures and centuries, humans have created entire belief systems around the afterlife. From the ancient Egyptians burying their dead with food and treasures for next world, to Christians envisioning heaven and hell, or Hindus believing in reincarnation, it's clear that this isn't just some fringe thought, it's a universal instinct. There's something deeply ingrained in us that refuses to accept the idea of complete annihilation after death. We cling to the hope that something of us, our soul, our essence, goes on. And I understand why. The idea that we simply cease to exist is terrifying, not because I'm afraid of pain or punishment, but because I can't quite wrap my mind around the concept of nothing. Try to imagine it. It's not black, not silence, not sleep. It's the absence of everything, including consciousness. That emptiness is perhaps more frightening than any religious notion of hell. And that fear has, over centuries, inspired human beings to seek out narratives that offer some comfort, some explanation for what comes next. I've often thought about how this search for answers reveals something beautiful and deeply human. We're not content just living for today. We want to believe that our lives matter in the grand scheme of things. That the love we give, the pain we suffer, the people we lose, it all has meaning beyond just temporary existence. Without that belief, it's hard to make sense of why we do what we do, why we strive to be good, or why we mourn so deeply when someone dies. If everything ends, truly ends, then what was the point? Of course, not everyone believes in life after death. Science often suggests that our consciousness is purely a product of brain chemistry. Once the brain dies, so does the mind. From a biological standpoint, we are animals with a finite lifespan, and that's it. But even among scientists, there's debate. Some point to quantum theories of consciousness, or near-death experiences that suggest we may not fully understand what happens when we die. I find that tension between science and spirituality fascinating. On one hand, we want to rely on what we can prove. On the other, we can't ignore the overwhelming emotional and existential pull towards something more. Personally, I've always leaned toward the belief that there is something after this life. Not because I've seen it or because I need to, but because it resonates with something deep inside me. When I hear stories of people who claim to have had near-death experiences, those who flatlined and returned describing vivid, life-altering visions, I can't help but listen. They talk about light-peace encounters with loved ones long gone. Are they hallucinations? Perhaps. But maybe they're glimpses of a reality we can't yet measure. I also think about the people I've lost. Family members, friends, people I love deeply. The idea that they're just gone, erased forever, is too painful to accept. I feel them still, sometimes in dreams, sometimes in quiet moments. I can't prove they're there, but I feel it. Maybe that's wishful thinking. Or maybe it's something more. The truth is, the afterlife question isn't just about death, it's about how we live. If we believe we go on, we may live with more purpose, more compassion. We may forgive more, love deeper, and hold on to hope in dark times. Believing in something beyond doesn't always mean fearing judgment or chasing reward. It can simply mean trusting that our story doesn't end on the last page. Every culture's afterlife myth, whether it's reincarnation, resurrection, or spiritual transcendence, offers a different lens through which to view death. But the common thread is unmistakable: we long to be more than temporary. We crave continuity, justice, reunion, peace. I believe that longing itself is a kind of evidence, not a physical reality, but of our internal truth. Maybe the fact that we need there to be more means that, in some mysterious way, there is. I don't claim to know the answers, but I do know that the question of life after death is not just about what happens when we die, it's about what it means to be human. And maybe, just maybe, that longing we all share is not just a fear of the unknown, but a quiet echo of something we've always known deep down, that we are not just bodies, not just brains, but something far more enduring. Maybe we are, in some way, already immortal. I've always found myself torn between two worlds when it comes to life after death, the spiritual and the scientific. On one hand, I grew up around people who believed that there's a soul, something eternal that exists beyond the body. On the other, I've also been deeply fascinated by science and its commitment to facts, evidence, and rational explanation. These two perspectives often seem like they're at war with each other. But for me, they're both trying to answer the same question: what really happens when we die? The spiritual side speaks to something deep within me. It tells me that I'm more than flesh and blood, that I have a soul, a purpose beyond just existing for a few decades and then vanishing. Religions all over the world, despite their differences, share a common belief that life doesn't end with death. Whether it's the idea of heaven, reincarnation, or returning to a higher source, they all offer a kind of continuity. And when I hear stories of people who've had near-death experiences or moments where they say they felt a presence, something divine, it's hard not to be moved by that. These are deeply personal moments that seem to transcend what science can fully explain. But then there's the scientific side, the one that demands proof, that wants things to be measured and tested. Science looks at death through a biological lens. When the heart stops beating, when the brain shuts down, life ends. Consciousness, according to many scientists, is just the result of neurons firing and chemicals moving through the brain. Once those processes stop, there's nothing left. From that perspective, the soul isn't a thing, it's just a metaphor, a word we use to describe emotions and thoughts that are really just brain activity. And yet, I can't help but feel that science doesn't have the whole picture either. There are things even scientists struggle to explain. Take consciousness, for example. We still don't fully understand what it is or where it comes from. We can track brain activity, sure, but the experiences of being aware, of having thoughts, emotions, dreams, that remains a mystery. Some researchers in quantum physics have even started to suggest that consciousness might not be purely physical, that it could be something more fundamental, something that doesn't die when the body does. That's a wild idea, and not one the scientific community fully agrees on, but it opens a door that maybe we've been too quick to close. I often wonder if the conflict between science and spirituality is more about language than truth. Maybe they're just describing the same thing in different ways. When a spiritual person talks about the soul and a scientist talks about consciousness, maybe they're reaching for the same mystery from opposite directions. Maybe spirituality gives meaning to the things science hasn't yet figured out, and maybe science grounds spiritual ideas in the real world. I don't think the two have to be enemies. In fact, some of the most brilliant minds in history believed in both. Einstein often spoke about a sense of wonder and awe in the face of the universe, what he called a cosmic religious feeling. He didn't believe in a personal God, but he did believe there was something greater than us, something we couldn't yet comprehend. And that's what I keep coming back to, the feeling that there's something more. I don't need the answers to be clear-cut. I don't need science to fully prove that a soul exists, or for religion to explain every detail of the afterlife. What I do need is a space where both can be heard, where they can challenge each other and maybe even support each other. Because while science tells us how things happen, spirituality often tells us why. And when it comes to death and whatever might come after, I think we need both. There are days when I lean towards science, when I think maybe this life really is all we get, that we should make the most of it, love hard, live deeply, and not waste time worrying about what comes next. But then there are moments, quiet ones, where I feel something I can't explain. A connection to someone who's gone. A sense of peace that comes out of nowhere. A dream so vivid it feels like a message. And in those moments, I believe that we are not just accidents of biology, that something about us endures. I don't pretend to have the answers. But I do know this: the human spirit is too complex, too powerful to be explained away by science alone. And the universe is too vast, too mysterious to think we've figured it all out. Maybe life after death isn't a question that can be answered in a lab or a scripture. Maybe it's something we feel, something we live towards, something we'll only truly understand when we get there. Until then, I'll keep listening to both voices, the rational and the spiritual, because I think somewhere in between them is a truth we're all trying to touch. There's something uniquely powerful about hearing someone speak of death. Not in a cold, clinical way, but as someone who claims to have touched it and come back. Over the years, I've listened to countless people share their near-death experiences, and every time I do, a part of me leans in just a little closer. These aren't just stories, they feel like glimpses into something hidden, something sacred. I've come to realize that while science may not validate these experiences, the emotional truth they carry can't be easily dismissed. The first time I heard someone describe dying, I remember being completely captivated. This wasn't a person seeking attention or trying to prove a religious point. It was someone who had technically died on an operating table, heart stopped, no brain activity, and then came back minutes later, shaken and transformed. They described floating above their body, watching the medical staff work frantically to bring them back. They spoke of a strange calm, a peace that felt more real than anything they'd ever felt before. Some would call that a hallucination, but to them, it was more vivid than life itself. As I heard more of these stories, I started to notice a pattern. People from different backgrounds, cultures, even belief systems were describing incredibly similar things: bright lights, out of body sensations, tunnels, encounters with loved ones or unknown presences. And what struck me wasn't just the consistency, but the emotional impact. Many of them said the experience changed their entire outlook on life. They no longer feared death. They valued people more. They stopped chasing superficial goals and instead tried to live with kindness and purpose. That kind of transformation can't be easily dismissed as just brain chemistry or oxygen deprivation. Something about those moments, real or imagined, touches a place deep inside the human spirit. I've spoken to skeptics too, people who are quick to say these are just the brain's final fireworks, the mind's way of protecting us from the trauma of death. And maybe they're right. Maybe when the brain is dying, it releases chemicals that create those sensations. But that explanation always feels too neat to me, too mechanical. It assumes that what people experience in those moments is less meaningful because it can be explained biologically. But if it feels real, if it changes lives, if it carries emotional truth, doesn't that make it real in a different way? One story in particular stayed with me. A man had been clinically dead for over 10 minutes. No heartbeat, no pulse. And when he came back, he described being taken through a life review. Not in a judgmental way, but like watching a movie of his own life. He saw moments he had forgotten, including things he'd said or done that hurt others. But instead of feeling punished, he said he felt profound understanding, like he was being shown those moments not to be condemned but to grow. He came back with tears in his eyes, not because he had seen heaven or hell, but because he had seen himself fully. That kind of clarity doesn't come from a dream or a delusion. That's something deeper. And then there are the people who claim to have met loved ones. Parents, children, spouses long gone, waiting in that space between life and death. Some describe being told it wasn't their time yet. Others say they felt the presence but didn't see faces, only a sense of recognition and love. It's hard to ignore the comfort in those accounts. Even if they're not proof of an afterlife, they offer something real to those who experience them. And that matters. It matters deeply. I think what draws me most to these testimonies is the honesty in them. Most people who have these experiences don't come back trying to build a religion around it. They don't act superior or claim to have all the answers. In fact, they're often more humbled by what they've seen. They admit they can't fully describe it. The words fall short. It's like trying to explain color to someone who's never had sight. But what they do share is a sense of peace, of connection, of something bigger than themselves. And I believe them, not because I need to, but because I see the change in their eyes. What if, in those few minutes where life seems to stop, we're given a window into another reality? What if death isn't a wall but a doorway? I don't know for sure, and I won't pretend to, but I do know that these experiences, these personal, emotional, soul-shaking moments, deserve to be heard and respected. They remind me that life is more than just what we can measure, and that death may not be the end, but a transition. So I keep listening to the stories, to the whispers between heartbeats, to the truth that doesn't come from data, but from the depth of human experience. Maybe those who've died and returned don't have the final answer, but they've brought something back with them, a light, a lesson, a hint of eternity. And for me, that's worth believing in. I've come to realize that our longing for life after death may be less about spiritual truth and more about something deeply psychological, a need to believe we are not temporary. From childhood, I remember being overwhelmed by the idea that everything I loved, everyone I cared about, even my own thoughts and dreams, could one day simply cease to exist. That sense of impermanence felt unbearable, almost unnatural. It didn't make sense to me that life, with all its beauty and pain, would just vanish into nothing. And I think that feeling is something nearly all of us share. The idea of immortality offers us comfort in a world filled with uncertainty. When we're faced with death, either our own or someone else's, we don't just feel fear. We feel disorientation. It's like something inside us refuses to believe that consciousness, identity, and love can be so fragile. So we reach for stories, beliefs, traditions, anything that can tell us we are more than matter. That deep craving isn't just spiritual, it's emotional. It's a survival instinct of the psyche. Without the hope of continuation, everything begins to feel hollow. There have been moments in my life when I've sat quietly and tried to imagine my own non-existence. Not death itself, but the state after nothingness. No thoughts, no memories, no awareness. Every time I try, it's like my mind short-circuits. It rejects the idea. I start thinking about what I'd miss, about the people I love, and about how strange it is that everything could keep going without me in it. That inability to fully picture my absence convinces me that there's something fundamental about the way we're wired. We're not made to accept oblivion. This psychological resistance to death shows up in countless ways. Some people seek immortality through religion, others through legacy. Building something, creating art, having children, it's not always about the afterlife in a literal sense. Sometimes it's about being remembered, leaving a trace. There's this desperate hope that somehow, in some form, will continue. And when we see people die, that fear intensifies. We start to realize how fragile we really are. So we cling harder to the idea that there must be more. What's interesting is that even people who claim not to believe in life after death often still behave as if their lives have a deeper purpose. They talk about morality, meaning, and justice, as if those things transcend individual existence. That, too, is a sign of our need for immortality. We want to believe that our actions matter in some larger sense, that life has a weight that persists beyond the grave. If we truly believed everything ended at death, would we still care about right and wrong? About making sacrifices? Maybe, but I suspect that something inside us still hopes there's more, even if we can't admit it. In my own life, the moments when I've felt most afraid of death were often tied to a sense of incompleteness. Not fear of physical pain, but fear that I hadn't done enough, that I hadn't said what needed to be said, that I might vanish without anyone truly knowing me. That psychological anxiety, the fear of erasure, is perhaps the strongest evidence of our need to believe in immortality. It's not just the body that wants to live, it's the self, the story of who we are, the memories we carry and the love we give. And I've noticed that people who believe in some form of life after death often seem more at peace. Whether or not their beliefs are factually true, they help ease the weight of mortality. There's a strength that comes from believing that we are part of something bigger. That this life is just a chapter, not the whole book. I don't think that's foolish or naive. I think it's deeply human. The idea of immortality may not be probable, but that doesn't make it meaningless. In fact, its very power lies in its ability to shape how we live. When we believe we are eternal in some way, we take life more seriously. We value relationships. We seek purpose. We fear wasting time. That belief, or even the need to believe, drives so much of what we do. It influences our ethics, our creativity, our compassion. That's not a flaw in our psychology. That's the core of it. I've come to accept that this need isn't something to be ashamed of. Wanting to go on, wanting to matter beyond death, is not weakness. It's a reflection of how deeply we care about life itself. We want our love to last. We want our stories to be remembered. We want to believe that everything we've felt and learned doesn't just vanish the moment our heart stops beating. Maybe that's why I keep asking the question, not to find proof, but to honor that part of me that refuses to let go. That voice that says quietly but persistently, there must be more. Whether that more is a soul, a heaven, another lifetime, or just the echo of our deeds in the hearts of others, I don't know. But I do know that the need for immortality isn't a weakness of the human mind. It's the very thing that makes us human in the first place.